So, but yeah, many questions. Let's yeah.
So real quick before we get started, can I ask the folks in the back to move forward a little so we can give a sense of just having you all as a part of this conversation? Thank you. Well, welcome to the 2025 Festival of the Book. My name is Dana. I am your moderator this afternoon. So the Virginia Festival of the Book, you've probably heard this already, but it is a program through the Virginia Humanities, which is a statewide organization whose mission is to connect people and ideas to explore the human experience. Most of our festival events are free of charge, but not free to produce. So if you'd like to consider supporting us at the end of this session or any time during the festival, we do appreciate it. There are QR codes in the back of your brochure that will enable you to easily do so online. And speaking of support, I'd like to give a special thanks to the Virginia Festival of the Book's premier sponsor, Michelle and David Baldacci, who have helped make this event possible. So before we begin, I just want to ask everyone to silence your cell phones. And I'd also like to encourage you to be aware of the exits around the building. In case of an emergency, there are folks in the back that can support you, and any of the folks who helped you come in, so you can ask them. At the conclusion of this panel, you will be able to purchase the books of both of these authors in a room just off that hallway where you came in. Purchasing books does help to support our authors, and you can get it signed when you do the same. And so I'm delighted to welcome Kathleen Dorothy Blackburn and Rachel Hanson. Kathleen is the author of the memoir Loose of Earth. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, Texas Observer, I'm not going to pronounce this right, Granerica, and elsewhere. She earned an MFA from The Ohio State University and a PhD from the University of Illinois at Chicago. For 5 years, she taught creative nonfiction workshops at the University of Chicago, and in the fall of 2024, she joined the English faculty at SUNY New Paltz as an assistant professor. Rachel holds an MFA in nonfiction from the University of Utah and a PhD in nonfiction from the University of Missouri. She directs the literary nonprofit Punch Bucket Lit and is an assistant professor of English at the UNC Asheville. I'm Dana, and in addition to serving as the event manager for the Festival of the Book, I'm also about to defend a dissertation that looks at the relationship between the impact of childhood trauma on development and behavior in schools. So when I heard that this panel was coming up, I jumped on it and was very excited to talk to both of these lovely women. Okay, so I'm going to launch in with my questions. I want to talk a little bit just about the process of memoir. And I think when trauma is at play, memoir can serve as healing. So Kathleen, you mentioned in your epilogue that most of your siblings would not read your book or engage in conversations about your past, in part because it's just too much truth. It's like, too much to reconcile with. And Rachel, from what I can tell, you no longer talk to your older siblings. I'm not sure where you are with your younger siblings yet, but I understand that this not engaging with your older siblings is likely self-protection. It's not healthy. Follow my notes. So in that vein, you have become the truth bearers for your family. And I think memoirs innately ask the readers to bear witness to this thing that has happened to you. In the case of trauma, I think they also serve as a way of validating the things that were largely invalidated during your childhood or unacknowledged. It's a way to say, no, this did happen, and this is how it happened to me. Does that resonate with you? Is that part of your motive for writing it? Or maybe you can talk us through why you needed to write these stories.
You go ahead. No. Go ahead. Okay, so that's a really good question, and honestly, I don't have, my reasoning for writing this initially was so that my little brothers and sister would know that I loved them. And it's like, it's very, it's very simple. And I wasn't thinking about the craft or the construction or healing or anything really. I just wanted them to know that, because I left them when they were so young, that like what I knew they would hear, they would be told a version of me that I knew would not be accurate. And so I just wanted them, for me initially it was just I wanted them to know that I loved them and that this was like the way I saw them and this was me in the world. And then some of the, so that's the simple, sort of the simple answer. And then, I don't know about healing because I felt pretty like this story, eventually I was numb to it after all the editing process. I don't know if that happens with you too. I was like, okay, here we go again, and eventually you get kind of numb to it. But there was like maybe over a year before when that was finished, before it came out, and I had to start reading it again and doing events and things. And then I was like, ooh, who is this person in here? So, I guess, I don't know if that really completely answers your question, but that's sort of how I'm like processing what this is now, at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that really resonates with me, Rachel, and your answer about why you wrote it. I'm trying not to cry up here. That was so beautiful. So maybe I'll just bounce off of the idea of healing and then go into why I wrote this, which is frankly something a question I'm still trying to answer. But I've had people say, when I was working on it, they would say, "Oh, it must be so therapeutic to be writing a memoir." And I was like, I'm in therapy because I'm writing this memoir. So there was certainly like, to me, it was interesting to start with an experience, and then to see how could that experience, how could there be meaning made of that experience through language. And that was really the process of just kind of obsessing over the language. And like Rachel described, as I was writing, I worked on it for 5 years, and I would gain distance from it with each sort of revision, and kind of forget that it was my mother I'm writing about, and that Kathleen in the book was me. And I think that's like the gift that the craft gives you. It's how you are able to kind of get through it and complicate and find some meaning. And then I remember getting the manuscript from my publisher, and the copy editing was done, and I just needed to read through it. I wasn't allowed to make any more changes, and I wept through so much of it. What I hear kind of in what Rachel was saying too is like you go from being the writer of the book to being a reader of it, and I was pretty stunned by what was in here in a way. So I didn't ever want to talk about the things that I ended up talking about in this book, and I actually studied writing for a good decade before I think that I had the skill for those memories to open up and ask to be written. So I wrote it as a result of kind of just the force of these memories coming back to me, and with a lot of resistance, honestly. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I got really excited to ask you guys questions and forgot to let you read a little bit. So we really would actually love to hear an excerpt from your book. I'm very excited to talk to you both. So do you want to each take just, 5 or 6 minutes and just read a little bit from your book?
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, you go.
I'll just read the opening, if that works. I think that'll get us to 5 minutes. On 17 in Appalachia. Not a year before I ran away from home at 17, I stepped out of the house at dusk, still able to see shrub oaks thinned out for winter, fame flower too, undone clay so wet the smell of it seemed settled in my skin. At my back, pastures spread far, darkened where dairy cows huddled for warmth in a slow January drizzle. I crossed the road, walked the length of my neighbor's yard, and knocked on his door, asking to play the piano he'd mentioned I was welcome to weeks earlier. I'd played when I was younger, when one of the houses we rented had an upright in the living room. Here, at my neighbor's, I hoped to remember how to make the keys work, and for the briefest moment, have some space to be more than a second mother to my siblings. Earlier in the day, while I was taking out the trash, my neighbor had called out to me to feel free to come over and take a break when I found time to slip away. He said he was sad to see someone as young as myself so work-worn, and had let me practice at his piano several times before. It wasn't until I was sitting at the piano bench that I noticed, when my neighbor pointed it out, how my hair fell more than halfway down my back. I looked down at the frayed ends and couldn't recall the last time it had been trimmed. He touched it, said it was soft, lovely, untethered. I gave an uneasy smile, told myself he didn't mean to leave his hands there so long. I'd hoped to speak to anyone who wouldn't ask me for a thing, though I see now there was a question in his fingertips. It didn't take long for him to show me the crack he kept hidden inside a pot on top of the refrigerator. He let me hold it, the small, milky-colored rocks kept in a baggie, told me how it must be boiled, made liquid in a spoon. I did not show my surprise, handled the drugs and the information as if it were no big deal. Because I was never sure what was normal and what was not, I'd been trying to learn how to keep a straight face when I wasn't sure how to react to a situation. Still, I looked across the way, back to where my little siblings lay sleeping under the covers I tucked them into. My instinct told me to move toward them, so I did, slowly, as if that had been my plan all along, before I held the drugs. But on the back porch steps, my neighbor stopped me and pressed a small bottle of gold schnapps in my hand. A girl should have a present on her birthday. I didn't go back inside our house immediately, but walked around to the backyard and sat beneath the largest of 2 oak trees. Its limbs stretched too far over the tin roof of the house and reached long across the barbed wire fence that separated our property from the farmers next door. There was something about the cold, that low, whispering wind that told me I would not last in Tennessee much longer, and the knowledge of it had made me desperate to find a way to stay, a way that already I knew did not exist. Later, inside our house, I shared the booze with my older brother, Ben, at the kitchen table, both of us wondering if the gold were real. We said, "Here's to us," drank fast, the cinnamon burn stretching grins on our faces, freezing there when our mother rang from the psychiatric ward of the hospital, a ward she'd seen more than once after insisting she had a physical illness that did not exist. She offered me a belabored breath and said, "I guess I should be saying happy birthday." I hated her for it, that sigh. I passed the phone to my brother, took scissors to the bathroom, cut my hair. In the morning, after I fed and dressed my 5 younger siblings, we sat huddled together in the living room watching cartoons. I looked at each one of their faces as they smiled and laughed at the television. I told myself I could not leave them, to look harder for a way to stay.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's really good. All right, I'm just going to read from the opening as well. An evangelist pitches a tent off the only dead-end interstate in West Texas. 2 nights, and he'll fly bullet fire straight up I-27, the same direction water once filled the irrigation ditches of one cotton field to another, stitching the southern high plains together with a shimmering thread. People say a man paddled a canoe from Lubbock to Amarillo in the 1930s, back when farmers believed a bottomless ocean lay beneath all the upturned dirt, and the government gave them enough money to pump ancient rock and flood their fields. It is now 1998, and my family and I live in Lubbock above the southern edge of that once vast aquifer. I am 13, with little idea that the Ogallala, the country's largest aquifer, is draining beneath my feet. I do not yet know the Sioux word Ogallala means to scatter one's own. another kind of desperation, has brought me to the revival. Mom heard about the evangelist on the radio, heard the word healing in his billing, and her heart stirred. She announced to our family of 7 that we would attend revival at Lubbock's empty fairgrounds, and absolutely no one was surprised. When I will recall later as an adult how often the Holy Spirit nudged Mom, I'll remember her brunette hair, hot-rollered and swept full at her shoulders, lit red in the dawn, sailor take warning. She heard so much from God in the late 90s, her hair curled with it. Stockyard air, thick with manure and chemical, wicks the tent walls. My eyes fix on the evangelist. He stands at the grassy front, a blur of beige suit and skin. A microphone pops with his breath. Dad says, "Tonight's the night." Mom closes her eyes and mouths the words to a prayer. I peel my legs up from the seat of a metal folding chair and tuck my hands underneath them. An invisible string cinches my shoulder blades together. I don't cuss, so I whisper, "Please." The state fair usually comes in June and sugar powders the air for a week of pig races between contestants with names like Rush Limb Hog. But it's early April, and we never go to the fair anyway. Mom says the rides are slapdash, the food heart attack. Still, I picture a Ferris wheel in place of the tent, a gigantic sparkling bangle with a cotton silo for backdrop. Each stranger in the tent could be a storyteller, so thick are their faces with living. My mother stands out in such a place. She is muscular, her skin dewy and smooth, limbs clenched like a cage. One wonders what turn in life brings this woman to a gathering of the hard up. But no one approaches Mom to ask. She looks like a dare, and most people choose truth. Besides, it doesn't take long to find the answer. My father is a young man growing old so fast it seems you can watch it happening if you stare. Eyes shift to take in signs of my father's bad fortune. His skin is tinted yellow. His shoulder bones peek under his polo. But nothing establishes the gravitas of our situation like the sight of me and my 4 younger siblings. Here are the 5 children of a woman with a dying husband. Have mercy. Eyes fill with watery hope, as though the very thought of fatherless children hearkens God's intervention. No adult has heard the news of my father without a shuddered heave and dialed to the internist. Even the mailman dropped his blue canvas bag and cried. But here in the slipshod dwelling of the sanctified, people smile with satisfaction, like they've been cast briefly into the years to come and beheld there, if not Christ's return, the amazing fact of Dad's recovery. Years will pass before I sit with this memory. So many years, in fact, that I will sometimes wonder if I imagined the traveling evangelist and his tent. Was he a fiction? His revival an amalgam of things I'd heard on the radio and seen broadcasted by the Christian network? I'll admit that these questions bring relief. If I am making up the healing service, perhaps I am also imagining the girl seated in the tent, her hope swinging violently into despair, her courage into shame. Maybe I was actually some other girl, one in a house across town, tucked between her parents on the living room couch, watching Star Trek, The Next Generation, and dozing off to sleep. Perhaps, too, the man I picture seated beside the girl in the tent is not my father, and I will look up from this memory to see I've missed a call from the man who is. But my phone screen is dark, and I am confronted with the sheer fact of my father's absence, a fact that leads my memory down a chain of images to a camp meeting tent. It glows in the dusk, ensconced in the darkening green of the South Plains Fairgrounds. I don't want to re-enter the tent, but inside sit the only father I have known, and the only child I ever was. The evangelist, like a carnival barker, raises his finger and points at my younger self. My eyes sting as I watch her, even at the distance of 25 years. I feel again the dread I felt at the revival, and I am desperate once more to save my family, whether by prayer or by dragging us from the tent. But I cannot collapse the years between us. There is my past self, here is my present, and somewhere between us lies the truth of what happened, how it happened, and perhaps why. If I hoped to save my father's life, then I hope now to understand our history. At the time, in 1998, I think I already understand. The evangelist raises his finger in the air, and I await my excruciating conviction. Dad will die because of me.
Thank you both. So beautiful. So that's a good segue into my next question. You both have very strong themes of religion throughout your books, and I similarly grew up in a childhood where religion was used as a form of manipulation and control. I'm interested to hear about your process of awakening to that and understanding that so many of the things you were led to believe were not just true, but also horrible consequences could happen if you didn't follow these edicts. In awakening to that and realizing the horrible things wouldn't actually happen to you, and then the process of developing your own belief system and how you saw the world outside of that.
It was a slow process. So part of what's going on in this story is my father has fourth stage colon cancer, and it's spread to his liver, and he's 38 years old. And he's been given a short time to live by the doctors, and that is not the news that he wanted. And so when the medical professionals didn't give him the answer he wanted, which was he wanted a cure, he went to someone who would, and the faith healers would say what they wanted to hear. And the idea was that you had to believe, and that your faith itself could earn this miracle. Some people know this is like prosperity gospel. We were already a religious family. This just kicked our beliefs into high gear. And I felt this tremendous responsibility to have and perform enough faith that I could save my father's life. So for that to break down, it felt like the stakes of that were so high. But the first fissure for me did happen as he was deteriorating, and I could clearly see that he was not getting better. And there was a moment where I was kind of confronted with that fact, and I write about it in the book. The book kind of builds toward this inevitable confrontation between me and my dad, where I believed that if I just kind of perform faith in the face of what had become tremendous physical suffering, that the miracle would happen, and it didn't. And I felt this kind of split between what we were saying and also but what I knew was happening. And I write about it, and it was really interesting to revisit it and realize that this is where I began to understand process, yes, but paradox. And that the only way I could really appreciate my father's life was by understanding that he was dying. And the only way to prepare for that absence was to be in his presence. And so for me, that was the beginning of something that felt actually quite spiritual and paradoxical, even though what it was a loss of belief. And then it just took years. I think I'm a bit of a slow learner, slow burner, so it wasn't until my 20s that I really, I think, could kind of let the ideology go. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I just have to say, just because I have the microphone, seeing this a little 11-year-old girl carry that weight and that heaviness, if only I believe enough, that he would get better, really breaks my heart. Also makes me very angry for you. But it's interesting to hear the process and how long it takes to sort of find your own, what do you believe, or don't believe. My own sort of, I guess, thoughts about that, and when I I guess for me, doubt was I was very, very young. I was so terrified, really. I must have believed because I was scared, and I think fear is a real motivator, especially when you're a child. So I was afraid that I didn't believe enough and that I wasn't, and the fear was that I would then, go to like a very physical hell where it'd be very painful and that's where I would be forever. So like I got baptized like 3 times, I think. Just to be sure. But when I was 15, and like Kathleen's family, my family also, my mother sort of leading the way, would jump from church to church, religion to, always a Christian religion, but religion or sect of Christianity to another sect. And the last one was the Eastern Orthodox Church. And I refused to convert, and I liked the feeling of having agency. Like it was the only agency I could have. It was the only control where I could say, at least that's how it felt at the time. I mean, because I can imagine now how they could have probably forced me to do it, but didn't, and I like held that so close to it was just really, really empowering for me. And also, like, religion felt so heavy, like, physically being, when we would be in a church, it just felt so weighted, and it was so, for me, I was so bored, and I would watch the little, my little brothers be children and squirming and getting, harshed, much like what happens to in your book. And that bothered me so much, and so I knew that already it wasn't like I didn't have the belief that you're supposed to have to be able to do all the things that you're like live the way you're supposed to live. And I guess that started around probably when I was pretty young, but like really started figuring out between like 15 and 16. And I never really struggled with it either. It was just like that's over now. I never had a lot of guilt about it or anything, and yeah.
Great answers. Okay, so something else that struck me in both of your books is that your mothers were largely the aggressors in your family. They were the dominating ones, sort of steering the ship and, deciding this is the way it's going to be. Let's just, this is it. This is the reality we're existing in. Rachel, toward the end of your book, you mentioned this actual rage toward your mother, this mounting rage when she's keeping you from your younger siblings. And I think you hang up the phone and you call her an evil bitch. So in my household, my mother was also the abuser, and I had this therapist who used to say, well, you just need to forgive her. You just need to forgive her. And I'd be like, but what does that mean? And if it had been a man, is that what you would say? And I think our culture takes a very different stance on mothers than they do fathers. We assume if children grow up in an abusive home, it is the father, largely. And I think there's a lot less room to put that boundary up against your mother and say no, or I don't want to have a relationship with you. And so I'm just curious how that process has been for both of you. You have not alluded to your current state of things, or even really the last half of your life after your father's death. We don't have a lot of information, but I'm curious how you've navigated this is your mother, and where does that rage go, and how is it still a sort of subtext to your life, or how have you made sense of that and made peace or not made peace with it? Those are big questions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really, I think Will made a few jokes about therapy up here, and how, it's pretty helpful in terms of like processing and I'm stumbling here a little bit because I just, because I know how I do swear, so I'm trying really hard not to. I can shut down. Like I think having a mother like that, I think being raised that way, what it has made me be able to do is I shut down probably more than I should. And so I don't feel sad I don't miss my mother. I don't think about my mother, except, sometimes, occasionally, like, something will come up, and, I'll definitely have a moment. But for me, I've just moved on, and I am a different person, and that is a different life. But it's not really. It is my life. And so I don't know. It's so hard to, like, figure it all out. And so I think for a long time, I would just shut it down and I wouldn't engage. And I think in the book for me, and Kathleen and I were talking about this earlier before this started, that what I had to do was try to see her as a person and not my mother. And if I can see her as a person, and I can write parts of her as a person and her history and what made her be the way, like, turn into this person, I could understand or try. I couldn't really understand, but I would have history. And that's really, as a writer, that's how I was able to figure it out for the book. And as a human, it's sort of like, I'm also a teacher, so I'm like, historical context is really everything. And so that helps too, to make sense of it. And that's as far as I've gotten, So I don't know how healthy it is or whatever, but that's how it is, so, yeah.
So I'm in touch with my mom. She hasn't read the book. I don't think she ever will. And she kind of pretends like it doesn't exist, which is, a lot of what's happening in the book has to do with denial. So it's kind of a continuation in an interesting way of the things that I wrote about. But I so resonated with what Rachel was saying, especially about the writing became, the craft demanded that I write her well. And seeing her as in just one light isn't good writing. It's not, I don't want to read that. I didn't want to write it. So I had to, we were talking about this too, but I kind of had to look for contradictions in her. She was, read the Bible literally and was absolutely the kind of, announcing that we're going to go see the faith healers, but she is also a veterinarian and a very good one. And those seem like contradictions. She could be very harsh and controlling at home, and she could be so gentle with the animals. And those kinds of contradictions were actually gifts, both in life, but definitely on the page, to make her, to understand her as a fully irreducible person. You couldn't just say she's brilliant and she's gentle and an expert, or she's harsh, she's that she was all of those things. And honestly, writing her, I said every sentence about her was like lighting a match. It was actually took a lot more work to try to make my dad interesting. Part of it, because he's been gone for a while, but he was also just kind of a nicer person. But my mom is sort of on the page. Oh my gosh, she's so dynamic, and this connects a bit to the question about did the writing heal anything. And what I will say is I think that the most compassionate and empathetic side of me wrote her. I'm not always able to see her that way in my everyday life, the way that being on the page I could.
In that same vein, I think so much trauma is generational, and each of you at some point sort of dips into, you're telling these stories of past generations, which may not necessarily be an explanation for, but it almost seems like you're trying to map out the, like, where did this begin, and how do you find it's like, who is responsible? Where does that blame land? You know, is it my mother? Was it my mother's mother? Was it that trauma? Like, how do you make sense of that? And I guess, I don't know, I think there's also a lot of language today around, we break the generational cycle. Do you feel that pressure? You know, it's an unrealistic pressure that we seem to have, the sense that we could just end it right here in one generation. Do you feel that pressure? I guess just talk about this generational aspect of it and how you make sense of that.
You want to take?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, there's that one path. One of the ways of making sense of it is sort of thinking, yeah, like you're talking about, you know, what was my mom's mom like? What was her dad like? She had a really hard home life. There's so many different contexts, I feel like, that inform who we become. Place, for instance, huge. I can't imagine, as much as, you know, like Rachel and I have in common in our stories, one of the biggest differences is place. And this happened in West Texas, and I see it as so much of who my parents were and are. My mom is like having to do with the shaping of living in West Texas. And it wasn't just the religion; it was the Dust Bowl history of you come out here, you settle here, and you don't leave, even though this is a hostile place to live. And so I also saw her as part of like this kind of cultural history that makes West Texas what it is. And you know, I write about, for instance, during the Dust Bowl, there were different grifters who would come through to try to help make it rain, and they would literally fire cannons into the sky to create thunder. And I thought, like, yeah, that's like going to a faith healer. That had so much to do with it. But of course, I have a 3-year-old, and sometimes when I'm talking to him, my mother's still alive, but some kind of ghost of her is standing there, and I am in an argument with her about how I want to do this differently. And I've sort of realized that, having become a mom myself. So yeah, there's an attempt to make my own fresh mistakes with my kid.
Thanks for going first, Kathleen. Kathleen. I called you Kathleen. I'm sorry. Because I know you're a mom, and so I was actually just selfishly curious, like how do you do that? Another thing about your book. Sorry, I will answer the question. Another thing about your book that killed me was the way you write animals, and I find that really, really, you do it so well, and it's gut-wrenching. And I find myself getting a little bit nervous, like, please don't let anything bad happen to this one, you know. And I'm bringing up animals because I am not a mother, and I've just made a decision that I don't. There's so many siblings in they'll do it, and it'll be a mess, and I don't have to. So I have a lot of animals. I have 5 animals. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But in terms of, the question was generational. Do I feel pressure to or like thinking about trying to make sense of the generational trauma, right? I think place is absolutely yes, because we're affected by where we are. I mean, Appalachia. I actually was born in Texas. I don't know if you know that. I lived the first 5 years of my life in Texas. One other thing. But Appalachia is very, just like any place, you know, think of it's different. And Tennessee is a very distinct place, I think. And it has a way of certainly shaping you one way or the other. For me, it was I have to get out of here. And it was a place that I really loved. I thought was beautiful. And at some point I couldn't see it anymore. And so I wanted to get out. And when when I was writing this book, I think the distance was really important to be able to get place in terms of being able to see it, to be able to write it, and then thinking of my parents and where they came from and how they fit into the place that is sort of like where I think I of myself as growing up. It isn't where they grew up, because they were actually they're from Texas, and my father's actually adopted from Germany, but in 1957, I think. So anyways, for me, trying to piece together like their past to understand where they're coming from, that's so much different from what I don't fully understand it, because it's not how they were raised. But I think it was like, I'm getting to an answer eventually. I feel like it was a rebelling against how they were raised. And so here I am giving the middle finger to, I mean, of course, the way I was, domestic life was abuse. There's a lot of abuse there. So I know that there was some kind of that too in their history. And so I guess when I think about it, I think it's violence. I trace it to violence, and how do you respond to violence? And I think that's the answer. I think it's in the body. We inherit it, but also it's sort of like we're rational people. We have intellectual curiosity. We're able to say like, okay, how am I gonna respond to the violence that I know? And I think that's sort of the way things can change, if that makes any sense. And then of course I can't help myself, because I look at like society, I look at this country like. What was happening when my parents were growing up, and what were they responding to or not responding to? What's happening to me when I'm finally am not like so overwhelmed with everything that's happening in the domestic space, and I'm able to look outward. How am I responding to the world around me? And I think all of these pieces fit together to make something new, and hopefully better.
Okay, last question. This sort of leans toward the perseverance part. I think when you come out of a childhood of trauma, especially when there's neglect and abuse, which you certainly had in spades, you spend your adulthood kind of having to relearn the things you were supposed to learn as a kid and teach yourself how to be in the world. And you weren't in the public school system. You had your education was very not always true and accurate. And so, then you go out into the world and you sort of have to relearn the things that maybe a lot of other folks were already learning, and there's sort of a catch-up thing. So I'm just curious the path that you each found to kind of identify, your new truths, and how you were able to cultivate, that element of perseverance for yourselves, and if you had a person or people in your lives that were, helpful in learning some of these pieces and giving some of these things that you did not get when you were growing up.
Me. I would like to thank me for making it. I worked really hard. I read a lot. I was embarrassed by the gaps in my education. I was embarrassed. I didn't want people to know. I wouldn't talk about it very often or at all for a very long time, and I was unable to look people in the eye most of the time. It was a real struggle. I will say, in terms of like the education, that was very hard. It's still, I have a PhD, and I'm still like, I should know this, that never goes away. And I always sort of work at like, being better, learning more, and then of course I'm married now, and I'm married to somebody who's very, very smart, and it's so irritating sometimes. I'm like, I know that like he'll have answers to things, and I don't want him to know I don't know something, because I don't want to lessen, and so I'll go so stubborn, but I'll try to go figure those things out, and eventually I'll come around and like, hey, so I think I understand, and it could be something that I don't even need to know, but I just think I have to, and that never goes away. But in terms of so that's for the education, but in terms of being able to look people in the eye and talk and try to hang in the world, which is hard, as you probably know, when you're so isolated for so many years. I became a river guide. the way it happened was sort of random. And that's a rough crew. I was a river guide in the Grand Canyon for a very long time, and they are some rough folks. And a handful of them were like, no, you're going to talk. And you're like a little bit of a weirdo. But I was a hard worker, and I think they respected that, and they just, I think the answer was like, well, I had this great professor, but no, it was like these dirtbag river guides living out in the desert that saw me as a person, didn't care what I knew and didn't know in terms of education, but like just that I was a person. And so wild, but yeah, I don't even think they know. Like, and if I said this, they'd be like, whatever. They wouldn't. So yeah, that's sort of. Yeah.
That's amazing. So, so I want to answer the question, but I also want to talk for a moment about Rachel's book, which my husband and I read. He read it first because they were classmates back in the Utah MFA days. And so I was like so thrilled when we got paired for this festival. But when he was telling me about the book, and he just described your grit, your tenacity, your talent. You guys were there back in 2010, I think, and his memory of just the discipline and the strength actually of your intellect was so clear, and it became so clear to me in the way he described it. I have so much that you've made, the life that you've made on your own. So much admiration for it. All the odds were against you. It took so much grit and intelligence. And that's all, and you feel it in the language too, in the book. Well, I guess I'm going to answer the question, but I forgot what it was. It was about perseverance.
You're Xing way out. You're relearning of the things that were omitted.
Yeah, I say, well, this is how I do it. I have to ask a lot of questions. I have the same crippling insecurity about the gaps in what I know, and I was a little bit of a con girl in college. I just pretended like I knew everything. Now that I teach college students, I know I fooled absolutely zero people. But yeah, I would act like I knew things I didn't know. I was really bad at asking questions, but I eventually learned there's that, part of it, yeah, there were a few different people, but I think I'm just going to give credit to my girlfriends. I had some friends, even as a weird little homeschooler. I had some very cool friends as a teenager and one of them were still besties, and she was one of those worldly public schoolers, and we met at a swimming party for a church group. And I was there in my very modest swimsuit, and she told me I knew you were a homeschooler the second I saw your one piece. And she drove me home from that party, and we stopped at Sonic and got ice cream, and she told me about all the bad things her daddy had done, and I told her about my mom and dad, and it was just I think like there's these like saints in the world that you meet who take you under their wing, and I would have been such a lost girl without Carrie and without some of the other girlfriends who took me even though I was weird, and we're like, we're gonna go find some trouble together, and it's all gonna be okay. And then I went to college, and I never left. Now I teach, and I stayed and got as many degrees as I could, and then they told me I couldn't get any more. So now I help other people get theirs. But that college classroom, yeah, once I stepped into a classroom, I never wanted to leave.
Both of your stories are incredible. You are incredible women, and it really is amazing to read those stories and then see that you are here on earth and you can smile and exist and be, warm and open to others and so vulnerable with all of us with your story. What an incredible gift. So thank you for opening up and answering all of my deep, dark questions.
Those are great questions.
So yeah, really, really appreciate it. And then if you all have questions, you do. Okay, somebody will have a microphone. Okay.
I can answer that very quickly. So we really don't at all. Occasionally, my little brothers, some of them will reach out and we'll have a conversation, and then it'll be a few more years, and I think that's pretty normal. There's a huge age gap, and then also when you experience trauma. And you might have an opposite. I don't know. It's not all the same way. But if you experience trauma with somebody, sometimes seeing them, I think, can be difficult. And I don't know if that's why, but I don't. I mean, there's just really not much of a relationship there. I don't even know if they know this book exists. But I've made sure to always. They know they can find me, and that's how. And I'm just there whenever they do, and they pop up now and then. But yeah. So.
Yeah. I have 4 younger siblings that I write about in the book, and it was very similar. We were very close, and got even closer when going through my dad's illness, and then him being gone. It's been a bit of a challenge to learn how to relate as adults, because we know how to relate as kids in survival mode. But it's happened with a couple of them. One of my sisters, 2 years younger than me, and is pretty prominent in the story. We've become very close, but only recently. We kind of had to go through our 20s, and we weren't close at all. She doesn't want to read the book. She's afraid of what it will conjure for her, but she's so honest about that. And she bought a copy, and she had me sign it, and she loans it to her friends, and then they tell her about it. And then my youngest sister, who's 11 years younger than me, is one of my best friends. It's a miracle, and so it's fluid, and it takes time, and then and sometimes with some of them I'm not sure that we ever will be close, but good luck with your siblings. Yeah.
Any other questions? Just back there.
How did you decide if I'm ready to write this? Was there a period where you were thinking about it and then you worked your way into it? Did it happen?
I'm still not ready to write this.
Yeah, that's true.
Just the words start to come, and sometimes you listen and sometimes you don't. It was off and on for a long time for me.
Yeah, what literally happened was my mom digitized all the home videos in 2017, and she sent each one of us a thumb drive, my siblings and I, and I watched the first video, and it was this like a video letter my dad had made for his parents when he was 25, and hearing his voice and seeing him there, so young, no idea of what was to come. And this gets thrown around a lot, but I had a nervous breakdown, and all these memories just flooded back that I had been really pushing against. I didn't want to be the girl who'd lived that life. and I certainly didn't want other people to know and write about it, but the last thing I'll say about it is that resistance is a real good clue. It's, I'm going to quote Freud now and do it badly, but that there's the idea that whatever interpretation of a dream that you have that you most resist, that's where the truth is. And I think like writing memoir is the same way. I finally had the skill to do it too. I have students who will come in and they'll write their life story in 6 pages. I had to really, I think some part of my brain was like, you can handle it now, so here you go. Yeah.
Yes.
I love that.
How do we feel about family and estrangement and how it's treated in the culture?
I'm asking you
In English lit.
In English.
Right. I agree with you. Forgiveness, it might be overrated. Family estrangement. I know that it, like, people are like, that must be so hard, and that, like, and it's not. I mean, it is for me and I'll just go ahead and use the language that I have always used. It is when I think about the babies. They're not babies anymore. My 5 younger siblings are no longer babies. For years, that was very difficult, and I thought that I would be able to get them. Like I would be able to get them, and I'd keep them, and we'd all be together. And then eventually, I was so young. Like, how is that? That faded. But for years, that's what I held on to. That part, I think, will never not be painful. But in terms of estrangement, like from my older brothers, and my parents, I don't think it's like a bad thing to take care of yourself. And so I don't feel any sort of way about it other than, I guess there's that saying, it's like blood. You'll quote Freud, and I'll be like, blood is thicker than water. Whatever.
Yeah.
I promise I have a PhD. But no, like that's not true. I mean, technically yes, but like it doesn't feel like that to me. Like, so I don't. Yeah, I don't worry about it too much. Yeah.
I love what you said about forgiveness being overrated. I really do. I think forgiveness is hard, and it's thrown around willy-nilly. You did not do that. Your questions were beautiful, but there is this kind of like, just ask for forgiveness, just say you're sorry and get some forgiveness, and let's just all move on. I think the work of it is a mystery to me, and it's hard. But what it does is it restores trust, or can. And I don't know that there's always a path for that with certain people, that there can be a restoration of trust.
Well, yeah, especially when they don't want it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, yeah. So, I think that I hope our culture is becoming more accepting, that if you're going to be estranged, and you choose it, there's a really damn good reason for it, and that the world will send you other family that you can put that energy into. I think that to me seems like a good thing if it needs to happen. I'm in touch with my family, but I don't want to miss out on the family gossip. That's a real big. So you got to think about that too.
And I'll take the liberty to just weigh on this a little from a behavioral standpoint, which I think there is a cultural movement where there's a tendency to, I don't want to do the hard work of a relationship, and I think that can be toxic or dangerous for us just as a society and a culture. But the flip side of that is there's also this generational gap where, my parents' generation, parent was never wrong and they never said sorry. And there can be an inability to do that, which is necessary for repair and the continuation of a relationship. And I think that if the harm continues and is actively ongoing, then it isn't safe to continue that. And it all depends on your degree of resourcefulness. Like, do you have the resources to continue to be exposed to that harm and withstand it without, it impacting your daily life? And if you don't, then, that is the safe option, is to protect oneself. But I do always advocate for exhausting every possible pathway of finding that reconciliation and that healing if and when possible. So that's my take on it. Let's one more quick question, maybe, if we have one. I thought I saw one more hand go up. And then this.
Have you experienced guilt or regret in writing your stories?
Oh, sorry. Have we experienced guilt or regret for writing the stories? No. My book has lots of, I feel very guilty, but not about writing it, no.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, as you were asking your question, I was like, I feel guilt and regret are primary for me, but not about the book, not about writing the book. But I will say that when you get a box of author's copies a few weeks before your book comes out, and when the box arrived at my house, I didn't want to open it at first. I felt like I was going to let a feral animal out, and then I wouldn't be able to, I was, so there was something to me about I felt some fear about writing it. Not of retribution or anything like that, but just like, this thing I've been running from a long time is here now. And so it was a kind of significant moment to open that box. And yeah, good question.
Wow, so much good stuff. It's a lot to process. Okay, so of course these lovely ladies are going to be signing books after we conclude here in the back room. So you can purchase a book, have it signed. We would also love your feedback, just in terms of how the session went, how the festival is going. Your feedback really helps us design for next year and improve. So in the back of your brochure, you're going to see a QR code for a survey. We'd love it if you could do that. You can even do it while you're standing in line to get your book. If you have a hard time navigating on phones, we've got some paper surveys we can provide for you all as well. And I think that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Dana.
Thank you
Thanks
all
so
for
much, and
coming.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.